What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Syracuse Basketball Postgame presented by Krause Health. My name is Brent Axe. We are with you here after a pretty smooth sailing win for Syracuse. It didn't look like that early on. Yet another slow start for the Orange, but then Ramos, 17-0 run. They took control of the game. It was back and forth a little bit in the first half, but it was all Syracuse in the second half. And a couple of points of dominance for Syracuse in this matchup. First of all, Joe Girard with 28 points, hitting from the outside, hitting from the inside. He's dishing out 7 assists. Just a terrific effort from Joe Girard today. And Syracuse got a ton of scoring in the paint. They dominated Georgia Tech inside by a mark of 44-24. We'll go over the numbers here shortly. Malik Brown with a career high there. Jesse Edwards struggled in the first half, came around in the second half. Judah Mintz recovers from a rough game against Miami. So, you know, what Syracuse did today, like the old song said, they were taking care of business. You just couldn't step in a pothole against this team. At Georgia Tech, this was their 5th loss in a row. I mean, they had a win over Miami a few games back, but this is just a bad team that fell to 8-11 on the year. They've only won a single ACC game, where Syracuse improved to 13-7 and 6-3 in ACC play. So that's the word of the day, taking care of business every day. As Greg notes, Malik Brown looking great. Joe, amazing today. Married with the comment of the day already, and I'm sure you guys are going to have some great ones here as we highlight them. No more Joe Girard slander. And Merritt, I'm glad you brought that up, because what more does this guy have to do? There has just been, they've been very quiet as of late, but Girard, I believe that was his 8th game over 20 points this year, is consistent, a leader, a points getter. Anything you need from this guy, he does it. He has been as consistent as they've come for Syracuse. There are some points of contention that are always there with Joe, but, you know, you talk about his defense. He had a steal and went coast to coast in this game, made a couple other really good defensive plays. So those that are left, and it's a few, right? It's dwindling in the let's just hate on Joe Girard camp, have been awful quiet as of late. He single-handedly got Syracuse back in this game. That 17-0 run, I believe he had a part in, like, I think he had, I'd have to look at the numbers, but he pretty much scored or assisted on almost everything in that 17-0 run. And he was incredible today. Incredible leadership by Joe and a great performance from him. As Lori's checking in, say it's still morning out in Sacramento. Great way to start the day with some orange juice. Richard saying loving Malik Brown. And Rich is checking in from Buffalo. Go Bills. Tomorrow, Rich, what can Brown do for you? He can score career-high points, Doug. That's what he could do for you. Joe saying finally seeing less of Bell and Benny, and the team is better off for it. I still think this team needs Benny Williams, and unfortunately, he didn't continue his good play from Miami. He needs some consistency. Jesse needed help. Malik Brown gave it to him, and Malik is rolling. You know, Benny and Chris just kind of step back here. Chris Bell's been awful quiet as of late, but I still think this team is really going to need Benny Williams to do what they're fully capable of doing at this point. Jamie says Jesse dominates from the inside. JG3 hot from 3. And how about Malik Brown? As Dale says, at some point, we need to start seeing Brown as one of our big contributors with Jesse, JG3, and Judah. And I think he's pretty much there. I mean, he didn't have a great game against Miami, but 4 of his last 5 games, Malik Brown's been terrific and just keeps getting better to the point where he had a career high today, right? Michael saying JG3's senior experience is proving critical. He's playing his best ball at this point. Jeff says, great game. Love the play with team ball. Malik Brown should be in the starting 5. I mean, you could talk me into that. The starting lineup doesn't really matter for Syracuse, as we know. It's who's in the game when it matters and who's in the game when they're rolling. And Brown was that today. There's Iris who says, happy Saturday, everybody. Joe is money today. Malik Brown, a great game, 18 points. And Copeland came in and gave Syracuse some quality minutes. So you guys keep chatting there, and I will jump back in there shortly. But let's look at some numbers in this one. We mentioned the paint points that Syracuse got today. That was one of the big stats of the day, 44-24 over Georgia Tech. Syracuse shot 55% in this game, which tells you how much they lived in the paint beyond Joe Girard's 6 3-pointers. No one else even hit a 3-pointer for Syracuse in this game. Syracuse is 6 of 14 overall from 3-point range. Joe had all 6 of those threes. So they were living in the paint. They were terrific there. Syracuse was 12 of 18 at the free throw line. Georgia Tech just got to the free throw line a total of 6 times in this game. How about TV Teddy missing a call earlier in the game where the ball went off the face of a Georgia Tech player and they gave it to Georgia Tech? Thankfully, that call didn't end up swinging the game or anything. But, I mean, how do you miss that? TV Teddy. You should watch his TV. You should watch the replay and get that right. Syracuse beats Georgia Tech on the boards 33-27. Bench points were big. Malik Brown, a big part of that, 22-9. Syracuse had 18 assists on 31 field goals, which is good to see. A little bit more ball movement, spread it around for the Orange there. I mean, pretty much any category you look at, Syracuse dominates. Joe Girard was 11 of 21 overall. We mentioned the 6 threes that he had. But you know what else I loved about Joe's game today? He was dishing it. He had 7 assists. There was a stretch there where he had 4 straight assists on 4 possessions, going to Jesse inside, going to Malik inside, finding guys. Judah Mintz had a beautiful pass up the court at one point from Malik Brown, who put down a dunk. Confident Malik overall was 8 of 9. Shows you the work he was doing around the basket and the high percentage shots that he got. 4 rebounds for him on the day. Jesse with 14 and 7. For the Orange. Judah Mintz, we mentioned, bouncing back from that rough game against Miami. He ended up with 13 points, 6 assists on the day. And see, the balance was back there because the Miami game, he had 6 assists, but he also had 5 turnovers. In this game, he had 6 assists, but only 1 turnover, right? So you need that assist to turnover ratio to swing your way. And that was pretty much it. Quadir Copeland did play 17 minutes, get Syracuse 6 rebounds in that time. As Iris brought up, the quality minutes that he gave Syracuse there. Good to see a little more contribution from the bench. Chris Bell struggles today, just 2 points in 18 minutes. We mentioned Benny Williams. You know, he goes from 12 and 5 to 1 and 3 today. He just can't find a rhythm, can't find any consistency. And I think he's going to need to if Syracuse is going to win some of these quad 1 games coming up. And it starts Tuesday night with North Carolina. So now with 11 games to go, Syracuse has 8 of those 11 games are either quad 1 or quad 2. So they got Georgia Tech win in hand. They've got another game against Georgia Tech at the end of the road, and they also play Boston College and Florida State. Those are the 3 potholes Syracuse cannot step in. You've got to beat bad teams. You've got to maintain. And look, it's college basketball. Yeah, like I mentioned, Georgia Tech beat Miami a couple weeks ago. Anything can happen. But Syracuse, if they want to enter the NCAA tournament conversation, which they're nowhere near right now, they just don't have the resume. There's enough games on the slate to do it. They've got, of those 8, they've got to win 5 or 6 to be in that conversation. And the first one comes Tuesday night, 9:00 game at the Dome against North Carolina. All right, back to you guys with Mike saying bench scoring could be starting, but I personally like it coming from the bench. There's something about that, Mike, when you get a Brown off the bench, when Dion Waiters would come off the bench, certain players just kind of give you that spark. And sometimes you need it, as Syracuse has done this year. Another slow start, switched up the lineup. There was a lineup there at one point here. I think I made a note of it, where Syracuse had, it was a much different lineup than usual. I thought I made a note of it, but I think I tweeted it. But let me see if I can find it here, because it's a lineup you just don't see a lot. And it was a lineup that Jim Boeheim had to put in there to shake things up a little bit. You know, the starters weren't doing it, slow start. So you mix some things up there, you spark it up a little bit. Syracuse down 21-10 at one point, and the Orange go on that 17-0 run to get back into it here. Here it is. So at one point you had a lineup of Copeland, Hema, Brown, Torrance, and Girard. That is a lineup you don't see often, especially in the first half of the game. Dale says Hema may not show up on the stat line, but he holds the line while Jesse needs to rest. He absolutely does that. Hema never hurts you. He never hurts you. He's not offensively talented enough and familiar with the game enough to give him any extended minutes. You're obviously not going to play him over Jesse Edwards. But when Jesse struggles, when Jesse gets into foul trouble, just needs a break, like you noted, Dale, Hema holds down the fort. He's a great shot blocker. This is a kid who just learned the game. You know, I think 5-6 years ago. He's got a really interesting story, a really interesting backstory coming here to the United States and getting into basketball. And it's just a fascinating backstory on Mounir, if you can ever take the time to look up that and read about him and his life and his story. I'm sure we've written about him in that case on syracuse.com and should kind of follow up on that because he's got a really interesting life. But for a guy that, really just started getting into basketball in his late teens to look that composed out there in an ACC basketball game consistently is a credit to him. Rob says 10 guys played today. Has Boeheim done a better job managing all this depth than most of us anticipated? Yeah, I was surprised in a sense, not in one way, but because they had to shake things up. But he didn't only put Quadir in the game. Quadir played quality minutes because he earned those minutes. He's getting rebounds. He's got a presence out there, right? So it's that balance between the starters and the bench. And unfortunately, it's just Chris Bell and Benny Williams just continue to come up short where they need to. And Jim Boeheim is he just sticks with his lineup. How about this in comparison? Josh Pastner has played 9 different starting lineups this year. And that's not a necessity. That's not a strategy. That's because he can't find the right mix of players. A lot of balance on Georgia Tech, but Syracuse just sticks with the same lineup. But when you look at the bench points, as Jimmy notes here, 22-9 bench points in favor of Syracuse. Those guys will get in when it matters, right? So as I try to tell you guys this, the most overrated thing is Jim Boeheim's starting lineup. Never matters. It's who's in the game when it matters that you got to keep an eye on at that sense. All right, let's see. James says much of the bench points came from Syracuse, as it did. Joe noting outside looking in right now. Next bunch of games will determine their bubble status, as we were talking about with, the resume. It's just not there yet, but plenty. 8 of their next 11 games, quad 1, quad 2. There's Steve, who says we started unproductive players and played conventional basketball, fell behind by 11. We substituted productive players, went into the press and took over the game and played with much more energy even after we took the press off. Yeah, it's becoming almost a strategy. And I only mean this half facetiously, for Syracuse to fall behind, get to the press, and wake up. This is an early start. I was kind of wondering about the energy. There's a lot of Syracuse fans there in Atlanta. Building wasn't very full, but the people that were there, I actually think, if not even, there might have been more Syracuse fans in that building. And once they went on that run, went into the press, sparked things up 17-0. I mean, you're going to commercial breaks and you're thinking this game's at the Dome, right? Syracuse fans everywhere. Georgia Tech, obviously a bad team. That's a tough market. You got so much going on in Atlanta. You've got an NFL team. You've got an NBA team. You've got all kinds of professional sports, other things to do. So for Georgia Tech to kind of break through, Georgia football has been huge. Obviously, Georgia basketball has been better. So for Georgia Tech to break through on that, I mean, they were probably happy that people showed up today at that game, and they were mostly Syracuse fans at this point. Dale noting North Carolina going to be a big test, but thinks that Syracuse can win a close one there. Skyler thinks that Syracuse is more dangerous on the bubble. Yeah, we're used to Syracuse being on the bubble, right? It feels like that's the proper path for them to, you don't like a year where you already know you're in the tournament in the middle of February. That's boring, right? Let's have some drama going down the line here. There's our guy Brian checking in from Mass, saying once again, Joe Girard out-rebounds Benny and Bell combined. A nice team win that keeps us on the NIT bubble. Right now they are on the NIT bubble, but looking to get on the better bubble at this point, right? Skyler says Malik Brown deserves more minutes. It's interesting because he played 32 minutes in this game. I get what you're saying, that he deserves to play more minutes, like off the shoot, maybe start, be out there more. I don't really have a pushback on that. Jim just starts the same guys just out of habit and just wants to get those guys in a rhythm, see if Chris Bell could score. Benny, he'll have a great game, but then he'll have 3 bad games, right? He had 16 and 11 against Boston College on New Year's Eve, and then had 4 games where it's just, and missed a game due to illness. And then he has 12 and 5 the other night against Miami. Now, mind you, it's in a loss, but he's capable of it. That's the frustrating part, is Benny will show up every few games and have a game like that, but he is nowhere near as consistent as he needs to be at this point. Jeff thinks that Cuse could be a more dangerous team. Early season struggles have created a deeper team with more options as the season has progressed. Steve notes the press could lead us to the tournament if we use it proactively. Back to Iris, who thinks it's true, but Syracuse can't fall behind like that to better teams like Carolina, like Virginia, and like Duke, who beat Miami today. That's absolutely right. You can get away with this against Georgia Tech, and you can get away with this against bad teams. You fall behind. It was 21-10 today. at one point. North Carolina's not going to let you back in that game. That's always a bad matchup for Syracuse as it is. I can't wait to see Armando Bacot and Jesse Edwards battle in the paint. So Syracuse is a little bit more of a paint presence and a little bit more mindful of getting after rebounds and some of those things that Carolina's been able to jump on Syracuse in recent years. But you are absolutely right about you can't do that against better teams. There's a lot of good teams that are coming up on the schedule. Rob brings it up here. Man, I don't know if you guys caught that. So at one point, the Yes Network comes back, and they went to the wrong feed. They went to the next game that they were showing, which was, I think it was Notre Dame and Boston College. And Mike Kaminsky and the play-by-play guy, they were just kind of like having a conversation in pregame. I think they're probably testing mics, and there's a lot of pregame production that goes into these things. And they went to that feed, and these guys were talking about something that got real cringy real fast. And it's like, see, that's the first thing they teach you in broadcasting school, friends. The mic's always live. Like, always assume the mic's live. Never say anything with a microphone in front of your face that could get you in trouble. Not their fault, because they didn't know that. I mean, the Yes Network comes back, and it wasn't like for 4 or 5 seconds. This was like almost a minute before they realized they were on the wrong feed. So we got quite a different commentary in that sense. My goodness, that was interesting. Always assume the mic is hot and the mic is live for sure. Jeff says good wins, but more to lose than less to gain games. They need quad 1 wins, and they got plenty of quad 1 wins on the way. So while we're on the subject here, as Carolina, you can make the case it enters must-win territory. Syracuse has got to start winning some of these games at some point here, and that would be as good as any for Syracuse to do. So let's take a look down the road here, friends. With 11 games to go, this is what Syracuse has ahead of them. Tuesday night, North Carolina at the Dome. That's a quad 1 game at this point. Virginia Tech after that, second go-around with Virginia Tech. This time it's on the road. That, I believe, is going to fall into quad 1 territory at this point. Virginia next. That's definitely a quad 1 game at the Dome. And now you cross into February. Potholes here against Boston College and Florida State. They're both on the road. One's on a Saturday, one's on a Wednesday. Just, you can't lose those games if you hope to be in this conversation, right? NC State is currently top 25 in the net ranking. That's a quad 1 game at the Dome, followed by Duke, Clemson, Pitt. Now, there's a good space in between those games, 2 at home, 2 on the road. It's not like there's a quick turnaround. At Clemson, at Pitt is somewhat of a quick turnaround, but that's doable. You're at Clemson on a Wednesday, go to Pitt on a Saturday. So now we're towards the end of February. You get Georgia Tech again, and then you finish with Wake Forest. I'm not sure where Wake Forest is going to be. It's obviously not till March 4th. Right now, that would be a quad 2 game. I don't think that's going to work its way into a quad 1 game, especially at home. But all opportunities are in front of them. So what does Syracuse have going for them that's right at this point? They're getting great bench scoring. You're getting Malik Brown off the bench. Jesse Edwards is one of the better centers in the ACC in the country. Joe Girard is on a heater. Judah Mintz is one of the best freshmen in the league, right? Here's 2 things Syracuse has to improve on, I think, if they're going to really consistently, and I'll highlight some more of your comments as I'm talking about this, guys, but they've got to, get better at 3-point shooting. That's Chris Bell and Benny Williams. I know we talk a lot about their rebounding, but Benny hit a couple of threes against Miami. Chris Bell is out there primarily to shoot the ball, and he had 2 points today, right? So he's got to give Syracuse some extra scoring from the outside, because teams are going to shut down Girard. I shouldn't say shut down, but they're going to get after him, and they're going to make his life hectic to try and get off those threes. Justin Taylor, who was quiet today, is a compliment, but Chris Bell's the main 3-point compliment, and Benny can't hit him. So that's one thing. They got to be more consistent on rebounding. They were today. Miami dominated them there in the second half. And defense has got to be more consistent. And Steve brought it up. Like, I feel like the press actually now is part of the strategy. I don't think Jim Boeheim thinks, let me rephrase that. I don't think Jim Boeheim should think he should only go into the press when they're down, they need a spark, they've got to get going. I think it's strategy now. I think there's times you can throw the press out there. You can jump on teams when they're not expecting it, go for some possessions. And, if you get burned, then you can get out of it, right? But I feel like there's just something about when this team goes into the press, it just wakes them up, right? You got the zone can lull you to sleep if you're just in the zone, possession after possession after possession, especially if it's not working. Georgia Tech didn't burn you from the 3-point line. They got off a few earlier in the game and then settled back down to earth. But that goes back to what we were saying earlier about what better teams will do to Syracuse at this point. So do they have it in them to be consistent? Jim Boeheim was saying the other day on during a radio interview here in Syracuse on ESPN radio that he doesn't think this team has it in him to be consistent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. That's his big concern going forward. Today proved that because you had a number of guys that weren't consistent. Benny doesn't have the game. Chris Bell's disappeared the last few games, right? You don't have enough consistency where you need it. And defensively, it can get iffy, right? It can get real iffy for this team. It did in the first half of this game, right? Georgia Tech hit a couple of threes. Better teams will extend that run. Better teams aren't going to let you bounce back and get a 17-0 run on you. So that's the concern. But you got to take what you can get against bad teams and get better as a team. And almost, it's like a practice that counts when you play a bad team like that, right? Put it in the books. Dale says more athleticism since JB said we couldn't press a pair of pants. Well, they can certainly press a pair of pants now and much more because they're good at it. Brian says, knock on wood, there's been no major injuries, no student athlete flakeouts. The team is intact and improving going into these important games. Knock on wood for sure in that sense. Let's see. Just catching up with you guys a little bit here. Steve says Malik Brown, Tyler Roberson. Benny is more Roberson, inconsistent, but upside is big, but just can't live up to it. And he's got a residency in JB's doghouse. Yeah, poor Tyler Roberson. Man, that guy could just never get it going when he needed to. The looks on Jim Boeheim's face sometimes with that kid. I felt bad for him in his time here. Benny, we already did that one. Inconsistent, but upside is big. And there we go. We just said that. Joe, you got your comment up there twice. It was so darn good, right? Let's see here. Just flipping through as I catch up with you guys. Chris already wants to know who's starting next year. Wow. We're already going to next year. That's a great question, Chris, because who leaves in the portal? I don't think Judah's going to jump to the NBA, but if he keeps this up and somebody, gets in his ear that he's a first round pick, you never say never with those things. But look, Joe, I assume isn't going to take his extra year of eligibility. Jesse moves on. So you got Judah coming back. Does Justin Taylor move into the starting lineup next year? Remember, there's no recruits in the class of 2023 right now. What you see is what you get. You're certainly going to have to grab in a player or two from the portal. Do you put more of a priority on that? Malik Brown is certainly going to be in the starting lineup next year, right? Who takes over that center position is going to be huge. Is that Munir, or do you have to go in the portal for somebody like that? But we're getting way ahead of ourselves now, friends, because we're still worried about this team fighting its way back into tournament contention at this point. Did you see Bell's little sideline tantrum? Ooh, Adam, I did not see that. I did not see that. You are informing me of that. What point of the game was that? Jump in and give me some more details on that, Adam. I didn't see that, to be honest with you. Different Adam, get creative, softish full court press to eat up some clock, drop into the zone. The ceiling is low with the status quo at this point with this team. Let's see. Dale thinks that Jesse and Joe could use the COVID extra season. I don't think they're going to, but I don't think anybody would say no if they wanted to either. Let's see here. A couple more from you guys. Rob checking in from St. Pete. How about Joe Girard? Will he finally get some positive credits? Look, if he doesn't, that's just ridiculous. The way that people have been on Girard, look, I'll criticize any player fairly if they don't do what they need to do. We're fair about these things. Every column that I write after games, we have the sunny side and we have the dark side for a reason. We look at who did well, who did not well, right? So you balance it out. But some of the nitpicks and the low tolerance that people have for Joe Girard has just been absurd. And I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't know why people just obsess over these things. And all he's done, if you just look back at what he's been doing, is not only prove you wrong, but Joe Girard doesn't dunk, but he's been just dunking on people, right? he won this game today. Malik Brown was huge, and Jesse came in the second half. Judah recovered. Joe doesn't go on that heater in the first half and get Syracuse out of that hole they were in. They don't win this game. And Joe's done that time after time. He has had an incredible offensive season for this team. He's dishing out 7 assists today. Like, what more do you want from this guy? So hopefully the Girard haters have gone back into their little holes and are not going to crawl out of them again, because it's just ridiculous what has been happening here. Let's see. Bell got pulled because he didn't hustle up the court after a turnover, and mad because he got pulled. Well, Jim Boeheim's been telling Chris Bell all year he's got to hustle, get back on D, and rebound. And if he doesn't want to do it, I don't blame him for taking him out of the game at this point. Name one player for Syracuse who's been more hated than Joe Girard. It'd be hard to. It would be hard to. Yeah, Trevor Cooney took a lot of crap back in the day. It feels like there's always a player that kind of falls in the fans' doghouse and in the players' doghouse. Greg makes a good point here. Joe gets a lot of hate, I think, stemming from Kadari Richmond transferring. From there, it gets compounded and overblown. And look, I wish Kadari didn't transfer. I wish that worked out, because I thought he was a hell of a player. But what did that lead to? That led to Judah Mintz coming in, right? There's always somebody that can step in and take somebody's place. I think people get way too fired up about certain players coming and going, especially in the transfer portal era. I would have liked to see Kadari Richmond develop here, but he didn't mesh. He didn't have the right chemistry with Boeheim, and he ended up where he needed to be. He's done well at Seton Hall, and that's great. That's the beauty of college sports these days. If you find you're not comfortable somewhere, you can go in the portal and find another opportunity, right? If you're good enough, you're going to go somewhere where you're going to be needed, wanted, and excel. And I think he's done well at this point. Skylar says that Joe puts Syracuse on his back, and he deserves more respect for that. So look, I think he's going to get it now, right? Especially in his senior year, and especially if Syracuse can dip into these great games and win a few. That's it, man. That's all that's left. And it starts Tuesday night against North Carolina, the first of 8 opportunities to grab a quad 1 or quad 2 win down the stretch. That's when we're going to meet again, friends. Tuesday night, going to be a late night here on the East Coast, but you guys are watching from all over the place. So no matter what time it is for you, we will be here after Syracuse, North Carolina, Tuesday night on these same channels that you're watching. If you miss it live, don't forget you can always catch the replay. It archives automatically where you're watching now. We put the post up on syracuse.com and embed the YouTube clip in my recap, so plenty of chances to catch up if you missed the show. But if you missed the show live, you can't jump in on the comments like you guys have been doing all afternoon. So my thanks to you. Go Bills. See if we can get to the AFC Championship game tomorrow. Lori likes those late games out in Sacramento. There you go. Same with Mike. He's out there at a reasonable hour. Uncle Brent will be drinking plenty of coffee Tuesday night to stay up and do this show and do some writing afterwards. But that's what I do, so no complaints there. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, friends. Thanks for being here as always. Thanks to our friends at Krause Health, and we'll wrap it up there. Syracuse wins 80-63 over Georgia Tech today. We'll be back Tuesday night after the Orange take on the Tar Heels.